What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we are continuing looking at the Gatewalkers Adventure Path from Paizo for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This entry is titled They Watched the Stars, and we are picking up right where we left off with the player characters having just teleported from another planet into Skywatch at the observatory to meet their ally for the entirety of, I think, the rest of this campaign, based on the way it's setting things up in this chapter. This book is the middle one. We only have one more, the third one, which you all responded really positively to the last video. So if you continue to respond positively, then of course I will finish out the adventure path and give you my thoughts on the book as a whole and how to run it if you decide to throw it down at your table. This one's going to be a little bit different than previous how to runs or even the previous adventure path coverage, because there's a big element of this particular chapter and the rest of the campaign that I think deserves some care and diving into. And so I'm going to save that for the end, even though it's addressed in the book early on. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the adventure as a whole, my how to run kind of tips and tricks, but these are a lot less necessary for the adventure paths because Paizo seems to spend a lot of time adding sidebars and things like that to address some common issues that may come up in your game. So first and foremost, the player characters are in Skywatch and they meet Sakawachi, is the name based on how it's spelled, how I'm pronouncing it. Apologies if that's not quite the right pronunciation, but this speaks to something I think needs to be addressed at the outset. If you look at Sakawachi and her allies that you're going to be traveling with throughout this adventure, they are very heavily coded as being Inuit indigenous people from the northern part of the Northern American continent. In their clothing and the accessories, the weaponry that they use, and even the way it speaks about their cultures briefly, it really leans into this kind of coding, which I don't see anything that is a problem on my read of it, but I'm not a member of that culture and I'm not super familiar with the nuances of how to speak about that culture. So I will say, if you're concerned about that kind of thing, if you're running it for players that you want to be cognizant of that, or you're going to be doing this adventure path for any kind of audience, then as a game master, definitely do your research, look into these people groups so that you can make sure that you are representing them in a fair and engaging way. So the first section of the adventure is the escape from Skywatch. The characters have met up with Sakawachi, but her companions are either missing or captured, and she needs your help getting them out so that they can go with you as you all leave Skywatch. The succession of events that you have in Skywatch are all really fun and engaging. I especially like the gift of the winter wolf, where you encounter this winter wolf that has been cursed by a hag, and they the only way they can get rid of it is to gift it to someone else, and one of the player characters can take it. It grants you dark vision, but it hinders you during the daytime. So I like those kind of encounters where obviously the party could see a big magical wolf and just attack, and that's something that some player characters could do. But there's also another interesting story if the players are willing to engage with this wolf as it approaches in a non-threatening manner. The big rescue mission that I do want to discuss, though, is Denigi or Denigi. I'm not sure. I'm going to say Denigi because it's two I's, which makes me feel like it's a longer I sound. But Denigi, when you rescue them, they're poisoned with like a Dreamtime tea, and the player characters need to provide an antidote to allow them to no longer be under this condition. There is an antidote with her, but all this to say, Denagi's gear is in a separate building from where she is and also where the antidote is. You're in a marketplace and there's multiple buildings. And the main bad guy of this section of the adventure is in the shop with Denagi's gear, but there's no real good motivation outside of Denagi wanting the gear to for the players to go after it. And it's all very mundane gear that player characters could reasonably say, here's 20 gold pieces. That's triple what your gear was worth. You can buy some more once we get out of here. Let's go. So if you want the encounter to still happen with kind of the main bandit in this region of the city, then I would include something sentimental or something very important to Denagi with her gear that money can't buy. Whether it's the weapon, the spear that she wields was given to her by her grandmother or something like that, that makes it more imperative that the party go get the thing. Okay, it's in this section of the book where I noticed something that kind of continues throughout the rest of this book, that it's a complaint from a formatting standpoint. It's nothing wrong with the way the adventure is written, but I do want to give you a heads up as you're looking through this. The art for certain characters or elements within the adventure are like 3 or 4 pages after they're referenced in the book. Like the Winter Wool encounter in its entirety is on page 10, maybe bleeds over into 11 a little bit. But the art for the Winter Wolf doesn't show up until page 13. So it just makes it a little bit cumbersome if in the moment you're running it for your players and you want to show them what the wolf looks like, you have to flip ahead in the book and show them the art there. And this is consistent with NPC portraits and stuff like that throughout the rest of this book, where the art's not lining up in a pretty significant way with the actual encounters and write-ups within the book. I don't know the reasoning for that. I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but obviously the formatting, the text wrap, so it wasn't a mistake. But it's just something that I noticed that bothered me, where I would be reading and then I'd see the art of the Winter Wolf, like, oh, okay, and go back to reference the encounter again. Then we get to chapter 2, Still Waters, which has the player characters trying to navigate the Lake of Mists and Veils, which this lake is the section of the world that gets the full write-up within this adventure as well after the adventure is concluded. So if you really like the concept of this lake and want to dive deeper into it, the book has you covered. And I really like picking the lake as the aspect of the world that they dive deep into, because it, based on my reading of it, would be very easy to file the serial numbers off of all the proper nouns and slap this into any world that you want to play in. And you have this really robust, interesting, magical, arcane lake with some really cool stuff going on underneath the surface that you can use in your world, even if you're not playing in Galarian. But the long and short of this section of the adventure is the party finds a seaworthy ship that has a friendly ghost captain aboard with some automaton elements to actually allow the ship to function. And the ghost sends them on an adventure to go clear out the ice that is keeping the ship trapped, where the party has to deal with an evil naiad that is corrupting the area. And one thing I really appreciate about the way Paizo writes these adventures and designs them is, even when dealing with a corrupted evil naiad, there is a peaceful resolution with that entity. If the party goes through the dungeon, for lack of a better term, in a certain way, it's entirely possible by the time they get to her, she's cool. Like, because she has some other entities, some other fey entities in her home that are causing her problems. Party might stumble across them and have a combat encounter and kill them. And then when they get to her, she's like, oh, you already took care of that? Sure, I'll lift the corruption. You can go. And the party doesn't even have to kill her. Or if they go another path and don't encounter them, she's more than willing to say, listen, instead of fighting, if you go deal with these things, I'll lift the corruption. No big deal. Now, obviously, the party can then elect to go ahead and fight the evil corrupted knight, but they don't have to. Also, this book includes some new spells in the adventurer's toolbox at the end of the book. And I love that in the evil naiad's library, the adventurer specifically calls out that there is a spell scroll for each new spell included in this adventure. I love this because as a GM, oftentimes I'll get books like this and see the cool new toys and things like that it's giving me to give to my players to play with. But I have to like finagle and figure out, okay, when's the right time? Where do I introduce them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas this adventure, there's a library, just put it all in there and let them have it. And yes, thank you. Chapter 3, What Remains. The party gets to Egede, Egede. Don't know how to pronounce it. That's the last time I'm going to attempt. They arrive in this city, and there's some corruption going on. There's some interesting political elements. And this is where a lot of times adventure paths can be somewhat deceptive in their length, because the actual time that they spend in the city takes up just a few pages in the larger adventure. But I could see parties spending a lot more time here trying to suss out the corruption and the overzealous crusaders that now run the town, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and all this kind of stuff. So I could really see your adventure potentially slowing down quite a bit once you hit this point. So just be cognizant of that your players might want to do a lot of stuff. And if you don't want them to get hung up on it, pull back on how much you emphasize these elements of the city. Because I play with a lot of players. Heck, I'm one of the players that would really glob onto something and think it's part of the campaign of, oh, there's a corrupted city council. We need to figure out what's going on. And so if you don't want that, just be aware that you might want to not reveal all of that to the players. The party then hops into a caravan to head out towards the form a world wound in order to try to find it's Sakawachi's goal. And we'll get into that in a second. But what I really appreciate is on the caravan, whether or not your party enjoys combat or skill challenges or role play, there's something for all of your different players in this caravan segment, which is really good. The Ruins of Demora is the final chapter of this adventure, and they bring back the investigative tools that they had in the previous adventure, which I hate it when campaign-long adventure introduces a really cool mechanic or element one time, and then it's never brought up again. So I like that they're repeating of, okay, we did it at a lower level where the stakes were high, but now the stakes are higher and you need to do the same thing, but you have a better understanding of how it works. I like that repetitive mechanic to where you can build on it more and more as the campaign goes. Also, the party gets to fight a zombie dragon in this section of the adventure, which really fun and really cool. There's a lot of demons. So definitely when you're in Demora, it's the ruins of a former city that was infused with kind of celestial divine energy that now has been invaded by demons. Crank up the dial on the creepiness and the otherworldliness of this section of the adventure. Okay, and that's all I really wanted to cover for the actual adventure and how to run at the bones of it. It's a really well-written adventure. I would highly recommend, especially if you liked the first section. This just is on with the party trying to figure out what's going on with the missing moment. And you get a lot of that stuff through visions and dreams that the party collectively has on the Lake of Mists and Veils that I didn't get into, because I'm trying to avoid some spoilers because these are really fun to read. So I don't want to get too spoilery, but yeah, you get a lot of really cool pulling back the curtain a little bit on the overarching story. You don't get a lot of action from the players in terms of progressing the story forward. They're still very much trying to recover for the first chunk of this from getting teleported to another world and getting back on track. And it's not really until the tail end where they have a clear goal of, okay, this is our next step. Let's do it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're prepping your players for this adventure. Okay, let's talk about Sakawachi. So there's a whole sidebar on the very first page when this adventure kicks off where Sakawachi is a chosen one, for lack of a better way to put it, in a certain way. She is divinely ordained to play a big role in this campaign, in this adventure. And so the party is going with her as she tries to do what she needs to do to accomplish her destiny. And that could be a really big problem for a lot of players who don't like there being an NPC that is pulling focus away from what they're doing. And I feel like there are ways that you can mitigate that if you really like this adventure, if your players really like the idea of this adventure, where Sakawachi's not as prevalent. I will say that they do specifically try to assuage some of these fears by saying that in Dreamers of the Nameless Spires, the next chapter, the final chapter, the tide will turn a little bit and show just how important the players are in relation to Sakawachi's mission and destiny and how they are agents of their own destiny and things like that. So we do have a bit of that coming, but in the context of this adventure, running it, what can you do to make the players feel still like the big heroes of the story? I think number one thing that you can do, and they've addressed this, is Sakawachi does not take part in combat or skill challenges or anything. Like, she is along for the ride. She is still capable, but she can cast some spells that are beneficial for the players and stuff like that. But she's not on the front line. She's not getting the kill on the zombie dragon, that kind of stuff, which can help. But if you're still worried that your players are going to feel like her hired goons or whatever, then another step that you can take is have Sakawachi be younger. You age her down significantly to where she's early teens or even just preteen. And the people that are traveling with her are assisting her on her mission because she is so young, and they're there to help guide her. And that will put the players in much more of a position of authority where they share the mark with Sakawachi. Even though she was a part of the missing moment, she still bears the same mark that they do. But they are the much more seasoned, older adventurers, and she needs their help to accomplish her destiny and do the whole chosen one thing, rather than the players being along for the ride with her as she realizes her destiny. I think that dynamic shift can help with players not feeling, because now they're charged with protecting this person, guiding them. They can even have some influence on her outlook at the world if you want, that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that. That was just what came to the top of my head when I was thinking, how do you take a chosen one narrative and pull it back a little bit to where the player characters who aren't necessarily the chosen ones, even though they're marked, they have a big role to play in the story, but how do you still keep them in the spotlight? But overall, this is a fantastic second chapter to this adventure. I really enjoyed it. I'm excited to see what comes in the final and third chapter, where I feel like the story is really going to shift into another gear. This adventure, I will say, some people might feel like not a whole lot gets accomplished, like I mentioned, for the first half, because the party is still trying to get back on track. But there's still a lot of really fun and engaging things to do, whether it's getting through Skywatch and having these combat encounters and trying to rescue people, or going and fighting this evil naiad and interacting with the ghost captain and his automated ship components are really fun. And so while the overall campaign might not be moving forward at a breakneck speed, the adventures that the players are having as part of the campaign can still be really fun and engaging. But if you want some more insight into how to make sure that your players feel really special and you're putting them at the forefront of the stories that you're telling, go check out my video right there.